So domicide is the loss of home, which is not the same thing as losing your housing. It can be. So there's physical domicide, which is I destroy your home by destroying your house, right? Now, you can think of the contrary example. I put you in prison. You have housing, you have shelter, but it's, the one of the intents is it's not your home, right? It's not a home for you, right? So I'm just using those two to pull it apart.
Yes.
So, and then the idea here is that home is basically material engagement that allows you to enact a mythos so that you get worldview attunement. It is a symbolic machine in the way that we've been talking about here, in which you seriously play out. All right. Now it does work for you as shelter, but I'm not talking about it as a house. I'm talking about it as the way you play in it, which is home, right? And of course, one of the things kids play is, right, that kind of thing. In fact, there's a book written called Home, just about how profound home is. This is why loneliness and cultural shock are so powerful for you, because you're not home. You're not at home. And so that's domicide. Then we can talk more about, but think about all the things you do in your house to turn it into a home. I grew up with an expression, you might have heard it. It takes a heap of living to turn a house into a home.
Yeah, I've heard this one. Yeah. Also, home is where the heart is.
Home is where the heart is. And it was originally home is where the hearth is, because people gathered around it and entered into dialogue with each other and entered into ritual with each other.
Yeah.
So think about all the serious play you do in your home, the way you put up art, the way you put up pictures, all right, the way, so all this stuff you do, it's odd. People will often put up pictures of themselves and their family in their house. It's like, why? Are you going to forget these people? No. What is it I'm doing? I'm trying to bind my identity and their identity, because those identities are bound to the identity of this house. Right. I'm trying to identify it as this family place, right?
Yes. To make a house a home.
Right. And notice the play on the word familiarize. To make familiar is also to make it your family. It's exactly the word, right? Yeah. Okay, so what I'm trying to convey is that home has this incredible mythos, religio function to it. Now, you also have to recognize that home isn't a single thing. It's a nested thing for you. Your home, for example, my home is this apartment, but my home is also Toronto, Canada, the earth, right? Ultimately, the cosmos. In fact, the difference between the word universe and cosmos, one of the ways of understanding it is when I say cosmos, I'm feeling at home in the universe. I'm feeling at home in the physical housing of the universe. So domicide can go from a loss of a sense of home. How could that happen individually? You're with your beloved partner, you've been married, and then the marriage breaks down. Divorce, and you don't want to be in that place anymore. Or you can't live there anymore, because although the physicality of the structure hasn't changed, you're not at home in it anymore, because the way it was bound to the serious play of the cultivation of your love and your relationship, that has lost, and you're experiencing domicide.
Yes.
Now imagine that happening not for you individually in your house, but it happening for a civilization within the cosmos. That's domicide on the level of the meaning crisis. Right.
Okay. That makes sense. I want to read this excerpt. This was from the zombie book, Zombies in Western Culture, that you co-authored. Just sort of framing up domicide a little bit. You said, quote, "Humans are animals who most fundamentally understand what reality is, who we are, and how we ought to live by locating ourselves within larger narratives and meta-narratives that we hear and tell, and that constitute for us what is real and significant. When such narratives collapse, we are lost in the dislocation, fragmentation, and disorientation of homelessness. In short, one suffers a worldview crisis. One runs the risk of losing the plot." And you go on to say that this so there's this, and this kind of gets back to the homemaker versus the house builder, right? Where the house builder is constructing the physical reality, the homemaker is adding the realm of relevance to the house, I guess.
Yeah.
And you go on to say about Domicide here, or I guess this is worldview more. So Domicide would be the destruction of worldview. That it mirrors the Darwinian fittedness between an organism and its ecological niche.
Yes. You want me to unpack that?
So yeah, I'm very interested there. Darwinism, I'm increasingly compelled by this concept of universal Darwinism. It seems to be everywhere we look, right? Our own cognition has Darwinian elements to it. Yeah. What I'm interested here in getting towards is the relationship between worldview, domicide, and territoriality, right? We're all, we have a physical territoriality. Clearly humans take it a step further, it sounds like. Yeah.
So let's try the first thing about the idea, and this is it's post-Darwinian. So it's at the cutting edge of neo-Darwinian and post-Darwinian philosophy of biology. Another Walsh, by the way, my colleague at the University of Toronto, Dennis Walsh, who's cutting edge. Yes, all the important thinkers are at the University of Toronto. That is true.
Not that you're biased.
So anyways, so this is the idea of niche construction, and it's also been taken up within psychology by, I can't remember the name of the scientist. But anyway, so niche construction is the idea that not only is the organism being shaped by the environment, the organism is shaping the environment. Mm-hmm. And of course, global warming is a powerful example of that. Mm-hmm. We're engaging in a very, very risky kind of niche construction right now. And the thing about it is, right, that niche construction, right, it can vary in its scope and its depth, and there's all kinds of things. And it can be, there's a thing called the Baldwin effect when it can be happening, so the Baldwin effect is, let's say language is originally something like a skill that I have to learn, and it gets and everybody learns it, but it gives tremendous advantages, right? So for a while, everybody keeps learning it because it gives the advantages. But what's evolution going to do? If that persists long enough, evolution is going to start selecting for individuals who can learn it faster and faster and faster and faster until we become innately linguistic beings. That's the Baldwin effect. And that's another kind of example of that niche construction. We change the environment, and then the environment changes us, and then we change the environment.
Right.
Now, the same thing with all that imaginal projection. It's the same loop, Robert. What I do is I do this imaginal projection, right, that shapes the environment in a certain way, and then it shapes me. That's exactly what I'm doing with home. I shape this place so that I get shaped, and then I shape the play, and that's the loop. It's the same loop. And what am I trying to do? I'm trying to, and this is what all of culture is. We take that niche construction and we ratchet it up in culture. Because in culture, what is culture? Culture is shaping the world to me and shaping me to the world. That's what culture is. Right. And that process, right, that within culture, Clifford Geertz called worldview attunement, where the modeling of the shaping of the world to you and the shaping of you to the world are creating what Chris and Philip and I in the book called worldview attunement in the agent arena relationship.
Right.
The identity, right, of the agent and the identities in their arena are co-creating, co-determining, co-shaping each other. And domicide at the level of your worldview is a catastrophe. A tremendous catastrophe, the meaning crisis. So like you know, that poll in 2017 in the UK, 89% of people polled thought their lives were meaningless.
Yeah.
And we have overwhelming evidence that just has, and they also are lonely and they feel that their work is futile. Like all of these things are bound up together in the same way, right?
Yes.
And so one way of saying this is they don't feel at home in their lives in deep enough way. This is why COVID is causing this mental health tsunami, because we were already suffering domicide, And then what it is, it just accelerated domicide, and people were trapped in this little tiny narrow home and trapped within the meaning making of their own selfhood, and that's not enough. And so domicide got worse.
Yes.
So people reach out with conspiracy theories, and they try to. A conspiracy theory is an imaginal attempt, an irrational imaginal attempt to try and use mythos to home the world. That's what a conspiracy theory is.
Okay, that's interesting. So what? And I know in the case of the Grassy Narrows, which maybe you could speak to a little bit of that, and the Hellenistic case of domicide, because this doesn't have to be. You're talking about COVID kind of being this worldview level abstract destruction, but the Grassy Narrows was very much physical relocation. People sort of had their worldview shattered. Because what I'm getting at here, and I'm just being openly transparent, is that to the extent that worldview attunement and or domicide is related to actual Darwinian territoriality, I think we could then map that to property rights, because that's how human beings express property rights, or I'm sorry, express territorialities through property rights.
Yes.
And the most basic, people get very confused in this area. The most basic form of property is you own you, I own me, right? We each own our own time. That's the most personal form of property. The extension of property is what I combine myself with in the world. I plant a garden, I build a house, whatever. Yeah. So I take my self-ownership and extend it into ownership in the world. And so the thesis I'm sort of exploring here is that if we violate private property rights, is that an instigation of domicide?
It can be. I mean, so my concern here is, I mean, you're doing the Lockean theory, which I get, right? I remember studying it.
What is it? I don't even know what it is.
It goes back to John Locke. John Locke's idea is that I own my time and labor, and I mix it with other things, and that's how I turn it into my property.
Okay, yes.
John Locke's theory. And that's the theory of value that John Locke proposed. Now, the thing is, and while I'm not challenging that, I think there's, I want to challenge the individualism of Locke, because I think, given the way you've defined it, and given all the arguments we've made today, that there's not only individual cognition, there's distributed cognition.
Yes.
There's also the time of civilizations and the distribute, right? Mm-hmm. There's that. So there has to be a sense also in which there's not just individual property, there has to be property for distributed cognition, given your definition. There has to be how the group spends its time and how it mixes its time with the world. In an important way.
Yes.
And so what I would want to say is the notion of territory covers both of those possibilities. Because think of the territory of a country. That's not and it's not atomic. It's not yours plus mine. It's not like we link together all the individual properties. No. There's a distributed cognition, right, that functions in that way, and therefore the time investment, I'm trying to use terms that line up with yours, belongs to, right, the country or the nation, right? And so territory moves between the two as a term. And the interesting thing is, so does the notion of home. There's a notion of home that can be focused on you, then on your family, then on your neighborhood, and then on your country. Because you definitely feel like you're going home when you're going back to Canada. You even feel like you're at home well, I'm a Canadian. Sorry, I didn't mean presumptuous. When I'm abroad and I meet another Canadian, I feel like I'm at home, not because they live in my house or they even live in my city, but because we share Canada together. Yes. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
Okay, agreed with that we have to cooperate, interoperate, harmonize our actions, but there is a problem when we go from private property, which is like you own you and you own the things you produce, to this nebulous concept of public property, because let me give you an example though. Who owns English? Who owns English? You and I are absolutely. Well, you can't own English actually, because English is non-scarce. English is information. So the idea that you can own an idea is itself fallacious, and this goes into capitalism. True capitalism says intellectual property is BS.
Okay.
You can only own scarce factors of production.
So that's interesting then, because that means then, if what we've said, that home is largely a cultural thing, right, which is at the level of ideas and meaning and information making, then it is in some sense needs to be distinct from territory, if territory is, as I think you're indicating, bound to scarcity. So then there's a, although there's a similarity, there must be some important difference in kind between home and territory then, given this argument.
Yes, and when we confound the two, I think this may be a contributor to Domicide, frankly.
It could be. It could be.
This is where, like, there's a great book on this. I've been doing a series with Jimmy Song. It's called Democracy, the God That Failed. But it makes the point that when we moved from monarchy to democracy, the monarch had a property right in the people, basically had a tax base. So he had a financial incentive to keep taxes low and predictable, and not wage too much war, right? He wanted the tax base to be sustainable over time because he had a property right in the tax base. But when you move to a democratic governing model, you go from an ownership, like from the monarch having a private property right in the people, to a democratic ruler is just effectively renting the tax base. So they come in and they want to extract as much wealth as possible, and then they're out in 4 to 8 years. They don't give it. They don't care, right? They have no long-term interest.
So the frame problem. So while we set up democracy for the intended effect of being self-correcting, we have an unintended side effect, of turning people from invested owners, if I'll use your metaphor, into people that are renting and trying to exploit as much as they can in a limited amount of time.
Yes. No, you do. And he goes through a very compelling, a priori based argument that this raises time preference. So it's a de-civilizing force over time.
Right.
And so
this is analogous to Plato's argument. This is analogous to Plato's argument against democracy. Yes.
Interesting. I didn't know that. So that's what I'm getting at, just this idea, because it seems like there's a lot of confusion and confoundingness of like who gets to tell who what to do, like especially today we're trying to figure out how to govern ourselves. There's an upheaval in our social structures. But this idea of property really cuts through a lot of it. It's just like you own you, I own me. If we just respect that first and foremost, and we don't transgress against one another's property, it clarifies a lot of things in the world. So that's what I was trying to get at a little bit, is just see if there was a connection between domicide and property rights.
There is, I think, given what you're saying. I mean, the original meaning of violence is to violate, right, the boundaries of a person. And now one of the things we're doing, right, is we are extending the boundary of personhood such that we are extending the meaning of violence. So now people are even, and I have some philosophical concerns about this, but I understand the intent, which is, your language can be violent because you are crossing a certain boundary, right? And so I'm not advocating for that, and I'm not criticizing it. I'm just pointing out, right, that notion of boundary violation and ownership of oneself, being proper to oneself.
Yes,
that's the people forget the original meaning of the word property is in philosophy. When we talk about the properties of an object, we talk about the things that constitute its identity. Right.
One's own, I think, is what proper means.
Belonging to. Yes.
Belonging
right.
To,
So the way the shape belongs to this pencil, right? In that sense. So I agree with that. What we were exploring, but I thought we came to a good conclusion. We were exploring if the role of property in this deep ontological sense, right, the role it has in Domicide told us something about the relationship between home and territory. And then what I think we saw was the possibility, the realization that they are different because of the relations you said to scarcity and things like that. Interestingly, niche construction sits between then territory and home as an interesting mediating place, right? Because the organisms, they're sort of modifying their environment and shaping them, but it's not the same thing as setting up their territory.
And this is transjective again, right? This is where the narrative and the real world touch.
And then you said something I wanted to come back to. So I'm acknowledging your point about confusion about identity and property and ownership and selfhood. And all of these confusions are all rampant right now, and they're all I acknowledge, I think that's a deep thing. But I also, you said something, you dropped it like a gem, and I wanted to come back to it. You said they can be conflated or confused, home and territory, in a profound way. And I hadn't thought about that. And I just wanted to, if you don't want to, we don't have to discuss it right now, but I thought that was a really powerful idea, because you can see one of the problems you could see, well, this would be historically controversial, but it would not be an intellectually disrespectful. It's worthy of intellectual respect. One of the problems facing the Roman Empire was a control of territory, but there was not a home for most of the inhabitants within the empire. Right. And what one of the things Christianity did was it turned the empire into a home. And that's one of the ways in which it succeeded. And the Romans, because the Romans were confused about those two at a deep level, there was a vacuum that was actually filled by Christianity in an important way.
Okay, yes. This is the Hellenistic period Domicide you speak of, right?
Right.
Where they conquered a lot of new territory, but they hadn't put it under a canopy yet.
Yes, exactly. And so that empire is Alexander's empire, and then it fragments into a bunch of 4 smaller empires, and they're always warring, and people are moving around. And so you don't have shared language, you don't have shared religion, your ancestors may not have lived where you're living, right? And the political territory, the territorial boundaries are fluid and moving around. And so there's a terrific period in the Hellenistic period, basically from the fall of Alexander's empire to Rome, although I think it carries into Rome in the way I just indicated, in which there's massive domicide for the culture as a whole. And what you see is these powerful responses to that domicide. It's called an age of anxiety. You see it in art, you see it in religion, and you see it in the emergence of new types of philosophy, like Stoicism, Epicureanism, Gnosticism, that are where the main job of the philosopher is help to heal and make people feel at home in the cosmos again.
The physician of the soul, right?
Exactly. Call no man a philosopher who has not alleviated the suffering of others. Epicurus.
Beautiful. So then it's, again, trying to pull this back into kind of the pragmatic viewpoint. It's like there's all this newly conquered territory, but the cost of rapport and trust among its inhabitants is really high because they don't have a common canopy beneath which to organize. So with that high transaction cost comes a lot of, I guess, divisiveness and anxiety, right? You can't trust people, so you're very protectionist and isolated.
And also one of the things you've talked about, the monopoly of violence by the state. So the Roman Empire is violent. So the empire is trying to set up the empire as the sacred canopy, and eventually the emperor becomes a god. In that attempted almost to go back to the Bronze Age where the pharaoh was a god. There's an attempt to do that, and it doesn't work. It doesn't take. It ultimately fails precisely because it's just not well constructed. It doesn't give the mythos that was needed to pull the empire together.
It's interesting because I wonder too, this is something Peterson has argued, that private property rights are rooted in Judeo-Christian mythology in a way. So it's kind of perhaps an extension of that canopy, if you will. And
it could be. Given the way you've talked about it, though, I would expect that there should be a universal aspect to property that would not be specific to the Judeo-Christian heritage. So presumably there's property, I know you make a good distinction, which I value, between property and possession. But you can see even private possessions in other cultures, India, China, ancient Egypt. So what do you mean specifically? Other than the universal aspect, what do you mean specifically?
And property, again, it's kind of a nebulous term because there's many different forms of property throughout history. It's like the freehold property or this or that. But what I specifically mean is our modern conception of private property, where you fully own yourself. You're a completely sovereign individual. And I may be paraphrasing Peterson's argument here, but in general, he was saying that one of the core principles of Christ was that he taught us the sovereignty of the individual, like it's higher than the state, right? And so that is a principle to which the state is beholden, which became expressed in private property rights, which, you know, we still have today. And it's like habeas corpus, innocent until proven guilty. You know, all of these things it's a principle under which Western civilization is organized. So it's not saying the state's the highest power. It's saying individual sovereignty and liberty is the highest power. And that's what this whole thing is structured around.
Actually, it doesn't. You have to be careful.
Okay.
So I'm going to fight a bit of pushback on my colleague and friend.
Please. And I may be distorting this too. So I don't want to holding out like I'm quoting him.
I think it's plausible. I think it's a plausible interpretation. And if I get a chance, I'll ask Jordan.
Okay.
Because the idea and Jordan's right. And you can see this in the work of, what's his name? The guy who wrote Dominion, Tom Holland, right? You can see the idea, Christianity is the religion that, ends infanticide, killing of infants.
Yes. And slavery to a lot,
to some degree.
I'm not saying it's immediate, but the principles of it, even the rebellion against slavery in the U.S. was kind of had a Christian rooting, right?
Totally. I totally agree. The evangelical movement, it's funny, the evangelicals were once the left-wingers, right, in the American scene. The North is dominated by the evangelical movement that's pushing for the abolition of slavery. Wilberforce, who gets it removed from the British Empire, is motivated by Christianity. And of course, there's Gandhi and Martin Luther King, both deeply influenced by Jesus. I'm acknowledging all of that. And so the value of the individual human soul to God, which and the idea that it's not the state that makes us persons, it's agape that makes us persons.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. But the thing to remember then is that is ultimately a triangular relation. It's my individual soul, your individual soul, and how we make each other into persons, and how we together are the body of Christ. So what's ultimate is the agape, and agape is both. Remember, God is agape. Agape is both between us and also something that we together relate to. So while I agree with that, but Christianity also kept trying to say you have to counterbalance that with and I think you exemplify this, right? The danger with the sovereignty of the individual is egocentrism, is narcissism, right? Because you can conflate. You can think about this is good. I'm just having an insight. Think about narcissism. The narcissist goes from thinking that, they have a sovereignty to thinking they have a territory of everybody's attention upon them. See the difference? See the difference? So instead of being at home in themselves and how they are attending and being attended, how they respect, remember respect means to look at, how they respect and how they are respected, they then turn it from a home, right? And think about how home again is this, can be the shared project, agape, and the Christian, the original churches were homes, right? Yes. And how the narcissist turns it into territory, right?
And that would be defined when the narcissist, the territory would be someone that's now a conqueror, right? He's trying to actually transgress on the property of others, turn home into territory.
Right, exactly. So exactly, that's exactly it, right? And so you can see one way of understanding. I hadn't thought about this. This is fun. One way of thinking about the narcissist is somebody who's hungry to be at home, but mistakes that by constantly trying to conquer territory that relates always and solely to them.
Yeah, this reminds me of the Marley quote that the world will know peace when the power of love overcomes the love of power.
Yes, exactly.
Kind of thing, right? The narcissist mistakes power for love, his hunger for love, or agape, perhaps, he tries to replace with power and conquering.
Yeah. And so, and to be fair to Jordan, he was bringing that up in my most recent conversation with him. Yeah. But a longstanding criticism I've had of him is I've heard him talk a lot about, the sovereignty aspect of Christianity that
Yep.
you rightly put, but not enough about the agapic aspect.
Yes. So let me tie this back into one thing, because this is very interesting. Even if there is that narcissistic impulse, then we've maximized the sovereignty of the individual, but it goes too far, and all of a sudden he wants to project back into his home as a territory. He wants to conquer some of his home and make it a territory, which is like imposing his willpower on the property of others, right? The self-ownership of others. If that option is removed, because again, something like Bitcoin, it's an inviolable property, right? Presumably, you can't. That option's not there from a very practical standpoint. So does this then preserve the, because again, civilization, if you have inviolable property, this is a principle that we've been talking about for hundreds of years, from the Magna Carta, possibly even before that government really was there to preserve life, liberty, property. If property is inviolable, civilization is immortal, we might say.
That's good. What you just
again,
said,
we have inviolable property finally, so it would protect us from the potential narcissism of a sovereign individual.
It could. I mean, I mean, this is another instance of an argument you keep making, and I don't mean repetitively. You're developing it.
Yes.
That I really like the idea of, by managing this particular hybrid psycho-material technology, we can afford fundamental changes in the functionality of distributed cognition. I would say it would afford the ability to reduce it. I mean, because there's also, there's clearly psychodynamic and idiosyncratic, trauma and other reasons why people are narcissists. Yes. So while you may thwart them in trying to impose their narcissism, I don't think you're going to remove narcissism from the world, for example. So that's why I tried to answer your proposal.
Yeah, agreed. But presumably over time, it would be naturally selected against, though, right? If narcissism is just not an effective strategy, it would kind of go away over time.
It could be. I mean, the thing is, the narcissist, it depends. And this is where you said the nebulousness of property comes in. Because, we also pay attention, and there's a reason why we use that verb, right? And I don't know, if the proposal you're making, again, I'm ignorant. I'm ignorant of how Bitcoin works. I'm ignorant about a lot of the economics that I don't know. So if I'm answering out of ignorance, I apologize. But it seems I'm concerned. The concern I'm expressing is that even if we get what you might call the financial system, right, resistant to narcissism, the attentional sphere and the cultural sphere are still going to be an open playground for the narcissist in many ways.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting to think about. Okay, I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole, but and here's the other case I would just look at later is if there is a connection between domicide and property right violation, I would like to see, through that lens, historically look at the prevalence of domicide and central bank currency manipulation. Because again, when a central bank's printing money, they're violating everyone's property rights. That's all they're doing. There's nothing else there. Whatever propaganda they put out, there's literally nothing. And this is a priori. This is not my opinion. This is like, again, if money is just a claim on savings or a call option on all the stuff, let's say, if there's one group that can print more call options on the stuff, they're stealing from everyone else. You can't, it's 2 + 2 = 4, right? It's very fundamental. So I would just think about teasing out that connection more. It's like, okay, the more rapidly we violated property rights via central banking, did that contribute to an escalation in domicide? I'm not saying it's the only way to do it, but maybe the modern, because again, those and we can get into zombies, the zombie myth thing, go look at those charts in your book. All the explosion of the word zombie starts after 1971 when we go off the gold standard. There's this huge peak.
You made that point. It's a good point, Robert. Yeah, it's a good point. You saw my facial reaction. I wasn't sort of denying. I mean, what I was thinking is, I wonder if that argument you just made aligns with the other argument you made on behalf of certain historians that you can see a decline in morality and a meaning crisis as you adulterate the currency, right?
Yes.
And that there might. So what I was thinking of, maybe there's a connection there, and answering your question would require sort of carefully connecting those and then trying to see how that, look for the relevant historical evidence for your proposal, for your thesis.
Yeah. Again, Austrians would just argue it's all time preference at the end of the day. Like the more you raise the time preference, morality declines, civilization unwinds. And
there's overwhelming evidence for that.
Yeah.
But I did want to ask you something about that, because this is a tension within the self-control literature, the self-regulation literature, and there's two sides to it. So remember when we talked about this? We talked about, right, and mindfulness. So mindfulness, play, flow, they move you into the present moment in a profound way.
Yes.
Right? Now that's different from the person who's experiencing hyperbolic discounting and is impulsively eating the chocolate cake because they're not managing their time preference.
Yes.
So what I'm trying to say is there's two different ways of being in the present moment. One is deleterious, and you're right. The evidence for this is cross species. This is not just human beings.
Yes.
The evidence for hyperbolic discounting, overwhelming, and I'm acknowledging it. But right, I'm also like, I want to. Well, I'm asking you. Maybe we work out. Do you see what I'm saying? There's another sense of being in the present moment that's powerful, that's important for play, right? For development, for coming into the being mode, for all of these things. And, so again, how do we properly, I don't know, I'm asking this question for us, properly coordinate between the two of them, right?
It's a great question. And just instinctually what comes to mind is maybe it's a perspectival knowing thing. It's like when we're looking at the future, the lower our time preference, the further we're looking, right? Like they said, and the Native Americans used to make decisions 7 generations out, right? Whereas today in corporate America, it's quarterly results, right? So that's a shrinking of time preference when we're looking at the future. But there's this other, hit my own mic. This other form of perspectival knowing where like just to be present is to be in touch with reality in the moment, right? Of all. Yeah. So maybe it's two different ontological modes or something.
It is, I think, because when the second one, I'm thinking of Jesus of Nazareth saying, take no thought for the morrow, right? And consider the lilies of the valley. And Solomon and all of his finery was not as well clothed as that, right? And so there's something there too. And I don't want to turn that into a Hallmark card. There's a deep, profound thing about.
No, it's interesting that it's paradoxical in a way too, because like the timeless principles we've talked about, like justice and love, like they can only be here and now. It's like you can only have it, but to get there, you almost have to have. When you're looking forward, it has to be very far forward in a way. So there's a paradox.
I suspect, by the way, Robert, that this is a dimension of opponent processing and relevance realization that I did not properly try to articulate in my theory. I think there's a point of processing between these two modes and that we're constantly moving between them. And as we move between them, that alters our salience landscape. We know it does. And what I find relevant. So in addition to, the generalization versus the specialization and the temporal binding versus the inhibition on return, right? I think there's this other opponent processing between these two modes in some important way.
Yeah, no, I agree. I have the same sense. I want to try, because we're always pressed for time here. I want to just talk real quick because I don't know that we rooted Domicide well. So I'm just going to read a couple of excerpts about the case from the Grassy Narrows.
Could I say one thing? Because it's in the notes, but I want people to be clear. First of all, this is based on Brian Walsh, and I think the argument still runs. But people also need to know that there is the real factor, and it's ongoing. This is part of Canadian politics of the mercury poisoning, which we ignore in the book, right?
Yeah.
So there's a confound in there. Speaking as a scientist, however, one thing you can say on behalf of Brian Walsh's analysis, even as there is the mercury poisoning, the cultures can't respond to it. And that's another aspect of the domicile.
Well, I'd like to tie that piece in, actually. So yes. I'll read a couple of excerpts and then I'll add one piece of commentary. You said this, and this is in regard to the case of the Grassy Narrows Nation. You said, quote, the site of some of the most severe social and familial disintegration together with environmental despoliation ever to be seen in North America. Cases of domestic conflict, violence, and suicide exploded in number, employment plummeted, welfare dependency increased as many as 1,000 people showed symptoms of being infected with Minamata disease caused by mercury dumping upstream. Yeah. The connection I would like to make there, by the way, is mercury dumping upstream is a violation of property rights.
Yes.
Had that upstream been privatized, it is much less likely it would have been polluted into. Because this is one of the things property rights do is if I own something, I have a capital interest in protecting it. So if that had been a private property right and you dumped in my stream, I would have sued you and stopped you from doing it. So just tying that piece back in, and maybe you could just speak briefly to what this case of the Grassy Narrows Nation was and how it relates to domicide.
So the idea about the property, I take that well said, that there was no legal recourse. I want that understood, that that's also mixed up with and it's come to light, the horrible, at times genocidal policy of the Canadian government to the Indigenous people. I mean, and that's why they had no legal recourse. So I just want to acknowledge that. Yes, so that would have made I think that would have made a difference. But part of what Brian Walsh is arguing is that there was another factor, which was the replacing of the one style of housing with another that disrupted all of the cultural project. So not only were these people exposed to an environmental threat for the legal and economic reasons we've just discussed, their culture was at the same time slammed so that they didn't have the cultural resources to try and respond. We basically committed domicide on these people. So what we do is we throw them into a serious environmental threat, and then the domicide, because the way the houses had been set up in the Indigenous culture reflected their understanding of their sovereignty, but also the community, the way the mythos and the symbols and the enacted rituals. And this was replaced with a Western idea of what's an efficient way to put up housing and have had transfer. And so we had all this, efficiency ideas in terms of the housing, and we destroyed in a kind of obtuse manner, the homing. And so these people are simultaneously having their cognition sort of hammered by the mercury, and then we're taking out any of the cultural resources or the distributed cognition that would allow them to try to process, bring some meaning, and also maybe some agency and responsiveness, to this. So that's what we're trying to point to that was going on there. So there is this issue, and then there's this terrific, at the same time, domicide. And so those people were I don't mean, I mean this with utmost compassion, not any sense of cruelty. Those people were doomed. Yeah. They're doomed. It's like me coming in and taking away all your nutritious food and replacing it with really, really shitty food that's going to make you feel bad. And then removing all of the things that turn your dwelling into a home, making it completely austere and barren. And so you don't feel at home. And so you're feeling really shitty, and on top of it, you don't feel at home. Notice how when you feel sick, where do you want to go? When you feel sick, where do you want to go?
Home and in bed.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And you take that away from somebody.
Yeah. No, it's an excellent point. And then, to your earlier point that home is extended mind in a way, right? Yeah. So it's like their mind was being attacked by mercury, which was a violation of property rights arising from that. And then they were being physically removed from their home, where they had spaciousness and familiarity and all these things, and plucked down somewhere else. So it's this double whammy of property right violations just destroyed their mind effectively.
Yes. Very much so. Very much. And it's analogous to what happened with the Hellenistic domicile.
Yes.
Right. And so the argument we make in the book, Philip and Chris and I, is that here's a way of thinking about the meaning crisis. Meaning crisis is a domicile that you can't move from.
Right. Well, yeah, that's scary.
Yeah.
I want to, maybe this is the right place then. So, because I wanted to ask you about the connection between Domicide and the Logos.
Yes.
And one of the, again, quotes from the book here, this is a reference to Viktor Frankl.
Yes.
Very famous author, Man's Search for Meaning, survivor of Nazi internment camp.
Yep.
In the book, you write, his method of logotherapy, which I'll let you speak to what that is, gives a prescription for self-affirmation when one is, quote, in a position of utter desolation, when man cannot express himself in positive action, when his only achievement may consist in enduring his sufferings in the right way, an honorable way. Then this, you said, was hearkening back to the Stoics' response of the philosopher/physician to the Hellenistic domicide.
Exactly. So the Stoics, I mean, it's already in Plato and the Platonic tradition, but the Stoics really valorized the logos as not just a principle of human understanding, but as an ontological principle about how the universe is organized. And then they coupled that with the idea, and this is what Frankl is picking up on logotherapy is bringing the logos to a situation of trauma and suffering is a way in which you can home it. So let me try and do this a little step by step. So the Stoics are preceded by the Cynics, and we've degraded this word and we've lost the original meaning of the word. Now we use cynic to mean somebody with a secret agenda. That's not the original meaning. The Cynics are responding to Hellenistic domicide with this idea. What's caught like they're a doctor. Here's the diagnosis. Your distress is being caused by you're setting your heart upon the wrong things. You're setting your heart upon man-made conventions and institutions, and they will ultimately let you down.
Right.
They will also ultimately disappoint you. So you should set your heart on the two things that are eternal: natural law and moral law. That's cynicism. And that's why Diogenes leaves Athens and goes out and lives in a barrel. And that's why when Alexander comes, so here's Alexander, the king of the world, right? He comes to Diogenes and says, I can give you whatever you want. What do you want? And Alexander is a master of his own self-myth, right?
Yeah.
And Diogenes said, can you move a little to the left because you're blocking the sunlight? Right? Talk about individual sovereignty. Talk about,
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So, and what the Stoics said is they said the Cynics, and there's a direct line of teaching. The Stoics said the Cynics are on the right track, but they're concentrating too much on the what instead of the how. It's not what you set your heart on, it's how you set your heart on anything. And so what the Stoics are about is, right, and so Epictetus, right, pay attention to what's in your control, what's not in your control. And what does that mean? It means what we often try to do is control the world to deal with our trauma, and trying to move the world is really hard. And we don't even pay attention to the meaning, the framing.
Yes.
And a lot of the times we're suffering because of the meaning. It doesn't mean there isn't physical suffering. They never said that. But a lot of the times our psychological suffering, our existential suffering is due to the meaning of the thing rather than the thing itself. Right. So it's not what you're setting your heart on, but how you're setting your heart, right? And so understanding that allows you to bring the logos, the principle of intelligibility of meaning making, to bear. So what you're doing, right, and you can see this. Here's you have a daughter, right? So you've gone through this too. Okay, so you talk to people about their subjective well-being, which is how do you feel, how are you doing, how's your life going, right? And and people value that, and as they should. You know, one thing that really destroys your subjective well-being? Having a child. Your sleep goes down, your diet goes down, your relationship with your partner goes down, you're under constant stress, there's uncertainty. Your subjective well-being crashes. Why do people
somehow
do
not?
Well, you don't die, but it goes down. But you know what goes up? Meaning in life.
Mm-hmm. Hey, everybody. As you've no doubt learned by watching this show, Bitcoin is the single most important asset you can own in the 21st century. And one of the most important companies in Bitcoin today is NYDIG. NYDIG's mission is to get Bitcoin into the hands of as many people as possible. One of the ways they are accomplishing this mission is by empowering banks and financial technology companies to offer their own Bitcoin products and services. As a true game changer in the industry, NYDIG is safely unlocking the power of Bitcoin for forward-thinking individuals and institutions alike. Led by Robbie Gutman, Yin Zhao, and Ross Stevens, NYDIG has absolutely exploded onto the Bitcoin scene recently and has quickly become a leader in this space. So, whether you are a professional investor looking for asset management services or a company looking to white label your own Bitcoin product or service, consider NYDIG your single source solution for everything Bitcoin.
Which tells you and this is one of the things I think of the fundamental confusions of our culture. We think those two are identical. They correlate, but they can go apart like this.
Right.
You have a kid, and that's agape again, because that's where you're most experiencing agape. Now, here's the thing, and this is part of the meaning crisis. This is Frankl's insight, people can endure tremendous distress if they can find a meaning in it.
He who has a why can bear any how, right?
Yes, Nietzsche.
Yeah.
And Nietzsche got that, and he got that that's the key to the response to nihilism. You have to, I put it this way, the response to nihilism is no philosophical proposition. It's being able to fall in love with the world again.
Yeah.
Right? And so being able to bring a meaning onto something. Now, if you're in Domicide, and you'll like this language, I think, you know what you have a scarcity of? Meaning. And so you are in scarcity mentality, which means, as you said, you lose cognitive flexibility. You're subject to hyperbolic discounting. Scarcity mentality is now being well established within psychology. We are in a scarcity mentality about meaning, so we cannot use meaning to try to deal with our distress, and so we've got a vicious circle. We're suffering distress because we're feeling Domicide, and because we're in Domicide, we don't have the meaning to bring to bear, and there we go.
So deep and interesting, profound and mind-blowing in a lot of ways. I want to just, again, this is all hypothesis, but I love thinking out loud with you. So here goes. I think I've related to you previously that we know words are an expression of the logos, right?
Yes.
Again, the original meaning of the word or ratio. I've argued in much of my writing that prices, so words are this coordinating element of our existence. Prices too are it's an exchange ratio. So it's rooted in ratio, which I argue is an expression of the logos, right? It's human action. It's a representation of human action effectively that coordinates. That's what coordinates the economy or prices. And you're saying that Domicide is a scarcity of meaning. Nietzsche is saying the antidote to, Domicide or meaninglessness is this. To fall in love with the world again is like an antidote to this.
Well, that's my proposal. His proposal was the will to power, which is a different thing. But
right. Okay. Fair enough. So the idea that, again, central banks printing money, violating private property rights, distorting prices, by the way, and this is the real measurable pain point that central banks create. They create a misallocation of capital because they distort this communication apparatus we call prices. All of a sudden, you don't know if a price you observe in the marketplace is supply and demand or policy, right? They're picking winners and losers.
Yes, yes.
And this is maybe a segue to our next topic, is the myth of zombies. That's what creates zombie companies. A zombie company is, by definition, an enterprise which is producing losses. In a capitalistic environment, it would be bankrupt. Its capital would be reallocated to higher and better aims. But because there's a central bank behind it, stealing from the productive economy and allocating the stolen proceeds into that entity, these loss-producing enterprises can persist over time. That's what a zombie company is.
So it actually has that name, a zombie company, right?
Complete, like Google it, it's everywhere. And we're riddled with them. We're increasingly riddled with them. The more money we print, the more misallocation of capital there is, the more zombie companies we have.
Can I ask you that?
Yes.
I take you to be a trustworthy source. Like, have people done like historical empirical investigation of that correlation, that as you come into fiat currency, the number of zombie companies expands or grows? Like, is there a direct correlation? I would have, not off the top of my head, I don't know per se, but I will say this, like, in following the markets for 10 years, I can observe there's two things that happen. So when your money loses value over time, two things are happening. People become more prone to gambling, right? You're going to do anything you can to outpace inflation. You just want your dollar to be worth the same in purchasing power tomorrow as it is today. But the faster its value is diminished, the further out on the risk curve you're pushed. So you'll see more and more unicorn companies, more and more high risk ventures, essentially, as people are trying to outpace inflation. And the flip side of that is the more wealth is being confiscated by the government through inflation. And then they're picking winners and losers, right? They're just allocating this capital. Oh, this bond fund, this is really prevalent in China. Japan has been a zombie economy for 20 years now because their central bank was so overly active. Yeah. So that's kind of the two sides of the equation. I would have to get back to you on the empirical study, but I don't think it's super debated. You know, it's like, I don't even think people that are pro central banking can argue that zombie companies are bad, but they think that the benefits of printing outweigh the. I'm not disputing their the normative judgment that they're sort of ultimately long-term bad. What I'm wondering is the specific empirical claim that they're because two questions. Mm-hmm. Like, you claim that they're increasing, and I'm wondering, is the rate also increasing? The rate of the existence of zombie companies?
I would have to get back to you on that, but my sense of it, just off the top of my head, and having followed markets for 10 years, is that the answer is yes. I mean, and you could see, and it's not black or white, right? It's not like zombie company, non-zombie company. For instance, when we're printing, one of the things printing money does is it lets larger companies borrow money more cheaply to buy back their own shares.
Yes.
Okay. So they're getting privileged access to the stolen proceeds of inflation. And this drives centralization. Basically, the bigger you are, the cheaper you can borrow money, the bigger you can become. And this dispossesses all small companies. Because the costs of regulation are increasing, inflation are increasing. So this is actually creating disparity in wealth, not only at the individual level, but also in the corporate level and the geopolitical level, frankly. This lets the United States, we export inflation by printing the dollar. So we export the cost of inflation onto the world. We have what is called, the exorbitant privilege of being the global reserve currency. So we get to send other nations printed dollars that we can produce ad infinitum. They send us goods and services. So you can imagine how much of a privilege this really is. It's called the exorbitant privilege for a reason. So all that said, I just wanted to draw this, and maybe this is just me trying to make a good segue here, is there's an interesting connection between domicide, violation of private property, the emergence of zombie mythology, which, as we said in the beginning, the artist is mythologizing the present for the future. Yes. Zombie companies. Yep.
And also the extension of the term zombie to these companies. That's an important phenomena in its own right.
Yes. And then when I read your work on zombies, which we probably need to explain this, people think like, what are they talking about? I'll open with just another excerpt here. So you say that if the zombie draws out our withdrawal, stands for our lack of standing for anything, and is in touch with how out of touch our worldview has become, then the zombie is the embodiment of Domicide. Its lack of reflection is revealed in a disturbing trend of radical disengagement, cutting across all domains of human life, deeply severing ties to ourselves, others, and an overarching social meta-narrative. We stand to lose our cognizance, communicability, community, and culture. And again, just through my lens, I keep coming back to that. I think I'm positing here that property is that attunement mechanism between agent and arena, at least in the economic domain. And when we've distorted that attunement, this zombie mythology has emerged, and it's in culture everywhere, but it's not just the meta narrative, right? We're also taking that meta narrative and applying it to the real world in these companies. Rant over.
No, you're not ranting. That was great. And I am intrigued. I'm a scientist. I need more, but you're only presenting it also as a hypothesis. So right. Like the point you make about look at the spike in the graphs and look at the date and there's a correlation there, and I'm going to have to reflect on that because that's a very good observation. I want to acknowledge that right away.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Now, the idea that the attunement is going out because of that, and again, I've admitted that, especially in the original, it was not enough about distributed cognition, and relatedly, there was not enough about socioeconomics in the book, but even in a lot of the series. I've now been in the last 2 years really concentrating on distributed cognition. It's one of the reasons why I'm talking to you. One of the reasons why, I'm talking to you. So I want to acknowledge all of that, and I want to acknowledge the plausibility of the hypothesis. It should be taken seriously, reflected on. And you did qualify it, because what I want to say, though, is it's clear that the zombie also represents the inversion, the perversion of the Christian framework. It's a denigration of the resurrection, and then we have the zombie apocalypse. These two things, which is a denigration of the Christian notion of apocalypse. I'm not a Christian. I'm not advocating for Christianity, but I'm trying to show that there's also a mythos, right? All that mythos stuff, the symbols, the sacred play, right? The ritual, all of that is also being lost, and the loss of that is being represented in the zombie as well. Yes. And now, I don't think the if you'll allow me your adjective, the economic, and I'll say I don't think the socioeconomic and the cultural religious, and remember that culture and cultus are deeply connected, right? Okay, cultus, right? Yeah. Right. I don't think they're identical, but I want to say that I'm finding it increasingly plausible that they are affecting each other in the historical development of the meaning crisis. That's what I think I could respond to your proposal, your hypothesis.
Yes, then fair enough. That's and again, not mine, the Austrian tradition. They talk about the connection between civilization and culture, and the implementation of property, effectively, which you can think of money as just one of the implementations of the principle of property, effectively. And another way, maybe this will land with you a little bit. This keeps jumping into my mind. I don't know why, but like the concept of optimal grip and property. It's like, that's how we have this force of humanity moving around the globe. We're all trying to interoperate and coordinate in a way that, from a utilitarian standpoint, I guess satisfies the most wants for the most people.
Richard, that's brilliant. I'm sorry for interrupting. I just want to zoom in on that and expand it, because think about one of the maybe one of the core virtues is having an optimal grip on one's self.
Yes.
Because you can be too focused, or you can be too non-focused, right?
Right.
Right. You see what I'm trying to get at?
Yes. That too discriminating or too generalizing, I think.
Something, or also that I can be, like that. That's part of it. But also, I can be too close to myself and too distant from myself. Right. Think of the double meaning of the word pride. pride is, right, there's a sense in which it's a vice, and then we have a completely other meaning, which is now a sense of like so we can think about it as the territorial sense and the sovereignty sense of pride, given some of the language you talked about before. And optimal grip is, or let's talk about having a virtue, being courageous. I can be too self-protective, and that makes me a coward. I can be too negligent of myself, and then I become a foolhardy idiot.
Yes. Okay.
Optimal grip on oneself. You see?
Yes. No, please continue. You just reminded me of one of my favorite quotes of all time, though.
Which is what?
I have to look it up. It's a long one.
Okay.
It's G.K. Chesterton on courage.
Well, all I'm saying there is if what we're talking about is if the primary property is, right, the propriety towards one's selfhood, then the optimal grip on oneself, which is what virtue represents, there's a deep connection there. There has to be a deep connection between the optimal grip on oneself, sovereignty, property, these terms we're using.
Ownership of oneself.
Right, and the optimal grip on reality that we term virtue.
Yes,
that's what I'm saying. Those two are bound together.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. So, and there's a deep connection between the marketplace and virtue. So one way to maybe think about this is, who's the boss of the CEO?
Yes.
The market.
Yeah.
The market, all the collective property rights of the marketplace is telling the CEO what to do with his business to satisfy its wants.
Yeah.
So there's this, maybe that's the balance, is we have to have, respect for our own property and care, but it could go too far and be narcissism that projects itself as territory. But if it's checked against the inviolable property of others that are voting for what they want, right? And you can't take my property, you can only listen to my vote. That's the correct equilibrium, the proper equilibrium, we might say.
Yeah, appropriate.
Yeah, appropriate.
Property, right in the center, appropriate. So I take it, though, that you view that's an ideal description, because I take it, because you've launched many criticisms, that the current system we have and the corporations we have are terrifically corrupted in a lot of ways.
Capitalism, I think, in its purest sense, makes a lot of sense, but central banking is a fully corrupt institution. It's a currency counterfeiting organization. But I mean, not very, it sounds radical, but I'd say just study it and you'll find that is in fact at the bottom. And then from that, most government action is not proper either, right? So they're spending stolen proceeds to do different things.
Surely there's also many market players that are gaming this corrupt system also. I mean, that must also be
the zombie companies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. It creates a tendency towards centralization. And so, all right, let me read this quote from G.K. Chesterton. I don't know why. I'm just now like, things are just occurring to me and I just want to share them because it feels right. G.K. Chesterton made a quote on the paradox of courage.
We should set it up a little bit. Chesterton is a Christian. He's a Christian apologist, just so people know the background. Yes.
Yes. This is a bit of a long one, but I'm going to do my best here. So take the case of courage. No quality has ever so much addled the brains and tangled the definitions of merely rational sages. Courage is almost a contradiction in terms. It means a strong desire to live, taking the form of a readiness to die. He that will lose his life, the same shall save it. It is not by a piece of mysticism for saints and heroes. It is a piece of everyday advice for sailors or mountaineers. It might be printed on an Alpine guide or a drill book. This paradox is the whole principle of courage, even of quite earthly or brutal courage. A man cut off by the sea may save his life if he will risk it on the precipice. He can only get away from death by continually stepping within an inch of it. A soldier surrounded by enemies, if he is to cut his way out, needs to combine a strong desire for living with a strange carelessness about dying. He must not merely cling to life, for then he will be a coward and will not escape. He must not merely wait for death, for then he will be a suicide and he will not escape. He must seek his life in a spirit of furious indifference to it. He must desire life like water, yet drink death like wine.
That's brilliant. I want to do the same thing. I want to read one of my favorite quotes in response.
Please.
One of my closest friends gave me this beautiful card. And watch what happens when you open it. There's a ship inside.
Nice. Beautiful.
And this is from Moby Dick.
Okay.
But as in landlessness alone rides the highest truth, shoreless, indefinite as God, so better it is to perish in that howling infinite than be ingloriously dashed upon the lee, even if that were safety. For worm-like then, oh, who would crave and crawl to land? Terrors of the terrible. Is all this agony so vain? Take heart, O Balkington, that's one of the characters. Bear thee grimly, demigod, up from the spray of thy ocean perishing, straight up leaps thy apotheosis. And he's giving the example of a ship that is in the middle of the storm. And if it tries to get to shore, the storm will actually destroy it. And instead, what it has to do is turn away from the shore, away from home, and let the storm power it out to sea. And he's using that as a metaphor of our confrontation with the infinitude of existence and the kind of existential courage we have to summon up in order to actually continue to exist. Moby Dick is the great novel about the advent of the meaning crisis within sort of modernity's awareness. If I had to have one novel, it would be Moby Dick.
Moby Dick. Beautiful.
Great myth. Great mythos.
Yeah.
Moby Dick is mythos. The artist making a mythos for us now. Moby Dick is the mythos of the advent of the meaning crisis.
Beautiful. Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. I have not read Moby Dick, but now I'm going to order it. So thank you for that. Okay, so there's something, we could explore this for a long time. But, I want to move, maybe we'll leave it at, I'll leave it at this. The thought that I had was perhaps the zombie occurrence is a mythologization of property rights being violated via central banking and or the state. So we have zombie companies, deification of the state, which was the problem in the 20th century, right? That's what really created World War I, World War II was this ideological possession. And then, which was funded by the central bank. And then there's genocide and total war on the back of that. So
there is that. And, like I said, I think we make a careful argument in the book for the zombie as the symbol of the meaning crisis. Mm-hmm. Zombies, they can't speak, but they hunger for brains, the organ that makes sense of things. It's intelligible. Yes. They're the only communal monster, but they have no community. They shuffle around in a mindless horde like all of us do when we're walking up and down the streets in the cities, especially the Canadian cities in winter. But the zombie can't be satisfied. The zombie is fully bound. If you want to point to the creature who has the most hyperbolic discounting, right? The most time preference, the zombie, right? And the zombie is not supernatural.
Right.
Or generally, there's and in in The Walking Dead, they say this more than once in the series. We are the Walking Dead. Yes. The human beings are the zombies come from us, degraded, and we are just them already, but we haven't fully realized it. Yes. Right. And like I said, and then you get the perversion of the Christian. The zombies are resurrected, but not to the life, right? Not to the abundant life, but to the absolutely decadent life, because they are perpetually decaying. Yes. There's the apocalypse is supposed to reveal the new world that redeems this one, but the zombie apocalypse is just the endless growth of the decadence. Yes. And the zombie is, Deleuze said it right. It's, it's the only modern myth. It is the way in which the culture has been portraying the meaning crisis to itself. Yes. Now, like I said, I want to acknowledge your socioeconomic point, and it was not in my work, and that's just a lacuna. But like I said, I think the religio-cultural history and the philosophical history have also contributed greatly to the advent of the meaning crisis. Yes. I think the loss of the wisdom institutions, the loss of the monastery has also contributed to the meaning crisis, all of these things. And so I find it so, it's almost, so I'm really worried of the arrogance of my own theory here. But of course, they're going to call these companies zombie companies. Mm-hmm. Of course they are. Mm-hmm. Of course they are. Then think about it. They have all of mythology to draw from to label these countries, right? They could be changeling corporations or companies, or they could be, vampire companies because they're just sucking up. No, they're zombie. There's a reason why that was chosen.
Yes, they are walking dead. They continue to exist, but they're bleeding capital, right? They're losing money, but they're sustained by theft. So it's by eating brains, I guess, right? Eating the work of others.
What's interesting is how all of these things are constellating together.
Yes, right? Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Very, very powerfully.
No, I agree. And that's why I'm very, that's where your work really captivated me initially. I want to read maybe one last quote about this. And then if you think it's a good time, we could transition to hopefully a more hopeful topic. You said, quote, "It seems plausible that our elevated identification with these modalities is also symptomatic of our cultural domicide." We're talking about zombies being reflective of domicide. "It is a victual substitute for religious involvement, satiating our appetites for community and social coherence. In the absence of our sacred canopy, these partial modes of identification are overdrawn to meet the elements. They are exapted as pseudo-religious domiciles, shelters of culture to huddle within as we fend off encroachment by the zombies, elements of strangeness in the post-war world." So the sense that I get is that we've almost been experimenting when we come out from under the canopy of religion. We've experimented with other canopies like the state or what, and we haven't, we left something very important behind in that transition, and the state as a pseudo-religious domicile was inadequate, and that's what the 20th century showed.
And on both sides, the left and the right.
Yes,
on both sides, both
the state. Yes, exactly.
Yes. So yes, that's very much. And we're seeing. I mean, there's one way. I wouldn't say it's the only way. I'm not making an argument for exclusivity, but you can see what's happening in the United States as a, pseudo-religious civil war between, maybe wokeism on the left and the Trump cult on the right, and they're both authoritarian and they're both right in certain ways. And I'm going to piss off a lot of people saying that. I know there's other issues. I'm not denying that. I know there's other policy issues. I know there's other things going on, but I'm saying one of the dimensions is properly understood as a pseudo-religious dimension that helps to explain the deep faith, allegiance, identification with these particular ideological stances. We need an explanation beyond the practicality of certain policy commitments to explain this profound commitment that is ripping the country apart and putting it on the verge of a civil war, right? So I'm not. Again, I am not excluding the political points, the policy points, or economic issues, but I'm saying there's a religious dimension to this phenomena that also needs to be properly acknowledged. That's why you see all this religious behavior on both sides around their ideological commitments.
Absolutely. Very well said. And I think that this is not the first time this has happened. Maybe not in this way or to this extent, but pre-axial revolution, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, was the age of anxiety. Was that right?
No, the age of anxiety, the Hellenistic period, comes after the actual revolution.
Apologies. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we could speak to that then. How did we resolve the age of anxiety previously? And then we
resolved the age of anxiety by the emergence of the philosopher as a physician of the soul, by discovering this dimension to wisdom that was only implicit in the Socratic Platonic tradition, and then developing that out in the way like things that are very analogous to logotherapy. But you have to remember that then what happens is, Stoicism, the Platonic tradition, the Aristotelian tradition, right, get integrated. It's like the grand unifying field theory of human religiosity into Neo-Platonism. And then Neo-Platonism gets integrated with all of the profound mythos of Christianity. Yeah. And you get the grand synthesis of people like Augustine. And that is the creation of a new sacred canopy that that homed people, again, like I said, within the Roman Empire in a way that was distinct from, the political structures of the state. Wow.
So it was the pulling all of these meaning systems into a
grand unification,
a meta meaning system.
Yeah, a meta meaning. And that's Geertz's definition of religion. A religion is a meta meaning system that homes and makes possible by driving worldview attunement. It makes all the other meaning systems possible. It makes the legal meaning system possible, the economic system possible, the moral meaning system. It makes all of them possible. Religio.
Yes. Which maybe that is the mechanism for connecting property to Christ, right? It's like it's nested within this larger meaning system. Yeah.
It could be. I mean, like we said, I think, you can see Christianity is giving people an optimal grip on the self, between the sovereignty of the self and the participation of the self. I was just talking about this in another thing today. One of my favorite theologians, one of the great theologians, he even called himself the theologian of culture, is Paul Tillich, one of the great. The Courage to Be is one of the great books. And Tillich talked about Christianity as trying to get this, always respecting, not trying to resolve, but always trying to preserve the tonos, the creative tension between individuation and participation, and therefore getting an optimal grip on self and community. And it's constantly keeping them in opponent processing. Like I was suggesting to you earlier, each one is sort of correcting the other.
Right. Individuation and tonation?
No, individuation and participation.
Participation. Okay. Interesting. So just writing that down. Okay. So that's it. So, and then philosophy then was the antidote to the age of anxiety.
Ancient philosophy, as Pierre Hadot talks about in What is Ancient Philosophy? Philosophy as philia.
Yes.
The joint, the fellowship love of wisdom. Yes, very much. That was the solution.
So where does the line then go from, because you're saying philosophy is, I guess, coalescing all these meaning systems in one thing that then becomes a religion? Is that?
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting the way Christianity, oh boy, this is such a complex, but it's interesting the way in which, and I'm being a little bit oversimplistic, but I have to, just for purposes of this. The mythos of Christianity seeks out the logos of Neoplatonism, and they come together and they find a way of mutually supporting each other. There's a great anthology I recommend to you called Christian Platonism. Some of the best scholars, and Paul Tyler's book, Returning to Reality. He makes a case for Christian Neoplatonism, or just Christian Platonism as a response to the meaning crisis, because he's right. The Christian Neoplatonism, was engineered to deal with a profound meaning crisis. So, yeah, you can see the mythos of Christianity and the logos of Neoplatonism coming together, and they cross-pollinate, and they constrain, and they challenge each other.
Interesting.
So there's the Bronze Age collapse. It's the greatest collapse in civilization that the world has ever seen.
Yeah.
So there's no controversy about that. There's tons of controversy about what caused it. Maybe it's a change in technology. Chariot warfare is made obsolete very suddenly.
Yep.
It could be general systems collapse. It could be both. So, but nevertheless, massive collapse of civilization. And and there's an analogy. I'm trying to remember who made it. Maybe it was Drews. I'm not sure, but they compare it to like in the Bronze Age world, you have these huge empires, the Babylonian Empire and the Hittite Empire and the Egyptian Empire, and they compare them to like dinosaurs, and they've dominated, right? They've dominated the world for so long. And then the Bronze Age collapses like when the asteroid hit, and all the dinosaurs goes. Yes. And then there's all these little mammalian kingdoms that are springing up. And so there's tremendous amount of experimentation, but also warfare and distress. And right. And then what's born out of that, and we've talked about this, so I'll just remind people, we talked about, for very prosaic reason, you get the creation of these psychotechnologies, right? And then they get internalized into cognition. They create second order thinking. That totally alters how people, it totally alters the agent-arena relationship, how they identify or understand themselves, how they understand the world. And you get the axial view in which wisdom is not about belonging to the continual patterns of the cosmos, but wisdom is about transcending out of the world that is fallen or illusory because of the self-deceptive nature of our minds. This is the great discovery of the axial revolution. And somehow wisdom is now about transcending to a better world, a more real world. Now, the thing about that is, and it doesn't have to be this way, right? It can also metaphorically be this way. So you can also see the better world as a future world that you are going to work towards. And you get the Hebrew notion of the exodus out of the Bronze Age Empire, Egypt, towards a promised land where we are in right relationship with God, who's the ground of ultimate reality and that sort of thing. And that whole notion gets then embedded. Notice how many of our pseudo-religious ideologies, including the ones ripping us apart right now, are utopian in nature.
Of course,
utopian in nature. And I'm very, very, very wary of any position that is utopian for just that reason. It's a pseudo. That's a pretty good criterion for something being a pseudo-religious ideology.
Right.
And both Nazism and communism are utopic visions, comprehensive utopic visions.
Yeah.
So the thing is, right, that, and as I just indicated, that grammar, that cultural cognitive grammar of thinking of it as two worlds, first of all, it's a mythos and it's functional, but the mythos gets reified. It's like you said, like the frame that you first, it's so useful, but then you can't take your glasses off. And we can only think of the two worlds, the world above and the world below, or the utopia in the future and the world now. And the problem with that is that two worlds mythology does not sit within the scientific worldview. The scientific worldview has been exactly the opposite. It has been a worldview that has been flat. There is one world. There is one, think of the word universe there, right?
Yes.
Right.
One song.
And so what happens is, now we don't want to throw away all of the psychotechnologies, all of the ecologies of practice, all of the wisdom traditions that we inherited from the axial revolution, but the language and the cultural conceptual grammar we have for trying to think about it doesn't fit with our scientific worldview. So we either pretend somehow the scientific worldview is false and we get a fundamentalism, or we just say, well, we give up all that axial bullshit and we just adopt the nihilism inherent in the scientific worldview. Both of those are actually still bound to the axial revolution grammar, because one is saying one is saying the two worlds model is right and science is wrong, and the other one is saying, right, science is right, there's no two worlds, and then therefore there's no wisdom and meaning and all that, right? There's no spirituality, religion has no function. What I'm trying to do with the help of Chris and Philip and a lot of other people is say, how can we revalorize, bring back to life, and make a central cultural value everything that the axial revolution, including its children like Christianity, gave to us, without going into fundamentalism or nihilism. And pseudo-religious ideologies are almost always fundamentalisms that are terrified of nihilism, and that's how you can understand pseudo-religious ideologies. Fundamentalism's terrified of nihilism. If you don't think the Nazis are responding in a fundamentalist manner to the threat of nihilism within the Weimar Republic, you're not getting, and you don't see the Gnosticism within Nazism. You're not getting what the Nazis were on about. So we have to get out of that whole way of framing the problem. That's what Awakening from the Meaning Crisis is all about.
Wow. So fundamentalism on one side,
nihilism
associated
other,
with just religious. Where does fundamentalism derive from? Just
so
pure
fundamentalism
religious belief?
It arises within Christianity, and it arises in. I have to give credit to your country. Your country is the generator of religions and religious things. Like, it turns out new religions like Mormonism, and you're like, and it new styles of religion like fundamentalism. So that's what I mean. The United States is such a paradox. It's simultaneously one of the most secular and one of the most religious countries in the world. Let's put that aside. But anyways, because this is weird for Canadians looking on it from the outside, because we're so close to you in so many ways, right? But anyways, fundamentalism arose at the beginning of the 20th century, I believe, as a technical term to express a group of Christians and Christian theologians who were basically rejecting what was known as liberal theology. This has nothing to do with liberalism, well, not totally, but don't identify it with sort of the political meaning of liberal. What liberal theology was basically proposing was that the core of Christianity was to try and bring the kingdom of heaven on earth. It was about social policy, helping the poor, right? And again, all of these are good. It was abolishing slavery. That's part of this. Okay, so there's lots of good there, but what drove that idea that was the core of Christianity was this was an initial response to the success of science and technology. It was like, so Christianity can't really tell us about the nature of the world or the history of the world or how to build bridges or how to heal people when they're sick. But what Christianity can do, right, is it can give us moral guidance. And what's that moral guidance? Well, we should be taking care of the poor, we should, etc.
Yes.
Now, the fundamentalists came back and said, we reject that, because if this continues, Christianity is just going to disappear. It's just going to disappear into, right? One person once described the theology of the United Church, which is a liberal theological church within Canada, as it's nice to be nice. That's the whole theology, right? And so the fundamentalists, I think legitimately, were worried that Christianity was going to disappear, and they were worried that Christianity has a lot more in it than just its moral aspect. It has this, all the axial, they were worried that the entire axial heritage about the cultivation of wisdom, virtue, self-transcendence, the reality of God, all of that was being lost.
Okay.
But what they did is they basically said, we're going to reject liberal theology and we're going to reject science. Now, they won't say that, but that's actually what it means. Because what they did was they took the view that the Bible was fundamental in this specific sense, that these two meanings, the Bible, the Bible is absolutely unique, right? So no other religion will work. Right. The Bible is inerrant, and the Bible is final. There will be no further holy scripture. Okay. Right? And so the Bible is
perfect, basically.
Yeah, the Bible is perfect. In all ways. And then that gets you into tremendous conflict with science, because you seem to have to deny, the Stokes monkey trial. You have to deny evolutionary theory. You have to deny fundamental physics. You have to deny the fact, right, that the sun is the center of the solar system, and all kinds of problems. So
then we're stuck today between this I guess, specter of fundamentalism and then nihilism behind, because if you take science to its ultimate conclusion, there's no value in the universe.
One way of thinking of nihilism is a fundamentalism about science, that science is perfect, irreplaceable, and final in its ability to tell us about the fundamental nature of reality. So nihilism and fundamentalism, theism and atheism, the way it's often pitched, right? They depend on each other because they're just mirror versions of each other. And that whole forward. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, they share a belief in perfection, essentially.
Yes.
Sounds like.
Yes. Which they got from Plato, by the way, but that's another thing. So, and like I said, pseudo-religious ideologies are about perfection, the master race, right? The final, the final commune, right? All of these utopic things are about the perfectibility. And the idea is they give meaning back to history. They gave meaning back to violence, to suffering. And what they're supposed to do is protect us from nihilism, which is, again, why they are pursued with such vehemence. What I am trying to do, and maybe it's just hubris, and what I'm trying to do with a lot of people, and just like Christianity, there's all these communities springing up about people responding to the meaning crisis with ecologies of practices, mindfulness and movement, and all that stuff that Rafe Kelly is doing and other people, right? I'm trying to understand that, and I'm also trying to afford it the way Christianity was a response to the Hellenistic meaning crisis. Can we break out of this prison we're in, fundamentalism, nihilism, right? We want to exact what we got from the Axial Revolution, but we don't want to identify with it because we have to somehow appropriately, we have to optimally grip the science, what science is saying. Science also needs to respond and be able to, science has to be willing to challenge its fundamental ontology, and this is happening right now, the philosophy of physics and the philosophy of biology, in order to, science, the paradox is science has no place within the scientific worldview. Try to give me an explanation in terms of physics or chemistry of how science exists, what science is.
Right.
Good luck.
It's not grounded in anything. Yeah. Well, because the point is science is trying to filter out all value judgments, but everything is a value judgment at its basis. Is that? So that's well said. That's a particular take on scientism, which is the fundamentalism about science. I'm a scientist. I really deeply believe in scientists, and I practice it, and I will advocate for it. But I understand, right, that there is a threat of nihilism in here. And when you say science is supposed to be value-free, right? It's not only that. Truth depends on meaning. Yes.
Truth depends on meaning, and not just propositional meaning. The scientist has to have the right skills, right? It has to have the right state of mind.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It's all right. And so truth depends on meaning, and meaning is relevance realization, and that's a valuation process. And where is all of that being acknowledged within the scientific worldview? Right. So unless you can home meaning making, which is also person making, you can't ultimately home science. So you got this weird thing. You have the scientific worldview, but the science and the scientists have no home. No home within that worldview. So there's an inherent nihilism in that performative contradiction within science.
Interesting. Okay. So then awakening from the meaning crisis is the middle way between
Buddhist
theism and atheism.
Right. Non-theism, So the non-theism, and the idea to try, the transjective is trying to get outside of the subject-object divide, right? Trying to use the best cognitive science, the best, philosophy of biology, the best stuff we have from complex systems theory, dynamical systems theory, the innovative work being done in the philosophy of science, and the best work we have on going back to the wisdom traditions, because wisdom is a hot topic right now in psychology and cognitive science, using all of that to try and break out of this grammar of presuppositions that is dooming us.
Yeah.
That's what Awakening from the Meaning Crisis is trying to do. And everything since, all of my further projects, all of my series, and then the next big series I'm working on right now after Socrates are all about how can we address this.
Wow.
One of the reasons I'm talking with you, right, is because you saw a connection to a dimension that was lacking in the series, and also it connects to the whole thing I've been working on to try and respond to that gap, which is the role of distributed cognition, etc. Distributed extended cognition. That's why we're talking.
Yes.
That's how
No. Well, I'm very grateful to have been through this journey with you. It's been incredible, you know, very insightful for me personally. I hope really insightful for my audience. I think the work you're doing is tremendous. I mean, I hope you take great meaning in it, because I think it is very meaningful. And I hope to continue to help. I mean, I can refer, you know, I've read a lot about this scope, so I'll share with you the great economic philosophers that I found especially relevant to connecting these domains.
Was one of the person you mentioned Hayek? Is that one of the people you've mentioned?
I'll tell you. So I think Mises is the most profound in my opinion. There's also Hayek is one. Hayek's hard to read though. He's just, the way he writes is a bit complicated. Rothbard is another.
Yeah. The reason I mentioned Hayek is a philosopher friend of mine who's also like done work on the meaning crisis. I did the videos. Johannes Niederhauser. He's doing a new series on Hayek, and so I was thinking of checking that out as maybe as a way of and like he is a profound. I'm deeply influenced by Heidegger. Deeply influenced by German idealism. Like he's a profound thinker, profound philosopher.
There on the topic of distributed cognition, there's a paper by Hayek called "The Use of Knowledge in Society," and it's just a paper. It's 8 or 10 pages. I can send it to you. It's profound.
Yeah, I would love to read it. I would love to read it. I want to understand this more, because I have some criticisms, right? And I voiced them, and you've responded to them very respectfully and in kind. And I want to acknowledge and like say my appreciation and honor you for that. I think that was great.
Thank you. And it's reflected back because I'm just thinking out loud here. So I don't know what's sticking and what's just my meandering, and you've been very accommodating. So thank you for that. And I think you're onto something really big here. It sounds like, again, what did you say earlier? That we're all children of Descartes, where you're pushing the boundary of subject-object metaphysics in a way that may break through to something that we need, right? We're confused. We have a confusion generated by the way we're perceiving the world, perhaps.
Yes.
And I'm glad someone is addressing that. So thank you.
Well, the way we're perceiving the world, each other, and ourselves.
Yes. Right.
Thank you, Robert. This has been a wonderful time together. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, John.